On this seventh Sunday of Ordinary Time, we pick up where we left off on the last Sunday, the sixth Sunday, with the Beatitudes as presented in St. Luke's Gospel, which are Jesus' blueprints for how to be happy. He moves right from these blueprints of happiness into what is perhaps the most challenging teaching Jesus gives in the Gospels. We are to love our enemies. We are to bless those who curse us and pray for those who mistreat or abuse you. How are we to understand this teaching? Can we really love our enemies, bless those who curse us, or pray for those who abuse us? And what is the point of all of this anyway? First, what is meant by love? When we think of love, we often think of liking something or having strong affective emotion for something, a preference for something or someone. And this is why we say things like, I fell in love, or conversely, I fell out of love, sort of reinforcing the idea that we're out of control with love. We don't have any control over it. It's all about emotion. And emotions are powerful. They can very often take us over, sort of hijack our intellect and our will, make us do crazy things, as we say. People do crazy things for love. But this isn't what the ancient or theological understanding of love is. St. Thomas Aquinas' definition of love, as I'm sure you've heard, is willing the good of the other as other. So this means that love in its truest sense is given, expecting nothing in return. And sometimes we rationalize love thinking that if I love this person or if I'm good to them, maybe they'll love me back or they'll be good to me. So in the end, it's really about us. It's really about getting something out of it. But the love of God towards us, manifested in Jesus' paschal mystery, is completely and totally selfless. God's love given to us in the sacraments, in prayer, is not given so as to get something in return. It's all completely selfless. We read in Scripture that God makes the sun shine on the good and the wicked alike, and his rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. God gives freely, and he loves freely, and he commands that we ought to love in the same way, because after all, the Christian life is all about becoming more like God. To love in this way isn't to say that the affect, the emotions aren't involved, but rather that the intellect and the will are in charge. So we can choose to will the good for the other as other, to desire the good for someone we like, someone who we do have those positive emotions towards, those preferences towards, and we can also choose to desire the good for someone that we don't like, someone who is an enemy just the same. Jesus goes on to give us some concrete examples of just what this love is supposed to look like, what this love we are called to looks like. First, he says it consists of good actions towards even our enemies. I recall in my confession practicum in the seminary, I think I've shared this story before, but there was one day when our professor came in and he walked up to one of the deacons sitting in the front row, one of the most even-keeled deacons in our class. And he started off class by just asking him, he said, if I were to punch you in the face right now, what would you do? Of course, we were all kind of taken aback. We're like, okay, where's this going? And he said, well, I guess if you were to punch me in the face, I would probably punch you back. And our professor said, then evil would win. Then evil would win. Because evil wants to propagate itself. Evil wants to spread. So if we have an evil done to us, and we respond with an evil in return, then evil wins. But if we have an evil done to us, and we respond with good, then good wins. Jesus is telling us that we ought to respond to evil with good so that goodness wins out in the end, in our own hearts, as well as in the hearts of the other, the hearts of our enemies. Jesus then says that if our enemies curse us, we're to offer a blessing instead. Benedictio is the Latin for which we get the word blessing, which comes from bene, meaning good, and dicere, meaning to say. So a blessing is simply a good word. And a curse is the opposite. It's verbalizing a bad thing over someone. So it's the same idea here. If someone curses you and you curse them back, then evil wins. Evil has spread. It has propagated. But if someone says a curse towards you and you respond with a blessing, a good word, then good wins. Good wins in your heart as well as in theirs. Third, Jesus tells us to pray for those who abuse you or mistreat you. Now, prayer in this way is asking God to bless someone else. Now, the sort of prayer that Jesus is calling us to is not praying that someone gets what's coming to them. I've heard that said a number of times in confession. Longing for justice is not bad, but we ought to pray for mercy. For God has revealed himself in both the Old Testament and the New Testament to be a God of mercy primarily. Not to mention that we ourselves desire God be merciful towards us. So if we desire mercy and love, even though we know ourselves to be sinners, then we ought to freely give love and mercy to others, even to those whom we consider to be our enemies. St. Caesarius of Arles points out, everyone wants to have mercy shown to them, but few show mercy to others. How can you dare to ask for what you are not prepared to give? He who desires the mercy of heaven should show mercy here on earth. Responding to our enemies with love, a blessing instead of a curse, and praying for those who abuse us stops evil from spreading. It also changes our hearts to be more like the heart of God. And Jesus is calling us to live as God lives. He's calling us to a supernatural level of virtue. And we settle very often for natural virtue, thinking that that's enough to make it into heaven. But even that statement, enough to make it, is inherently aiming for the bottom. It's not aiming for greatness. It's aiming for a sort of spiritual mediocrity, enough to make it to heaven. Jesus didn't say, as long as you're basically a good person, don't steal and don't kill anyone, your reward will be great in heaven. Again, how many times have I heard that in the confessional? Father, I'm basically a good person. Rather, he said, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, do good and lend expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great in heaven. We need to stop settling for spiritual mediocrity, because each of us are made for greatness.